The late morning sun over London was a pale, watery thing, washing the facade of Buckingham Palace in a soft, grayish light. The tourists, a shivering but determined crowd, were packed 3 deep against the iron railings, their digital cameras and smartphones held aloft like modern-day offerings. They were here for the spectacle, the quintessential London experience, the changing of the guard. The air was filled with a cacophony of languages, the scent of damp wool and roasting chestnuts from a nearby cart, and the distant rhythmic thump of a marching band. Among the throng, a familiar figure stood out with the force of a supernova. Donald Trump, former President of the United States, was a head taller than most of the people around him, his posture rigid, his expression a mixture of impatience and theatrical importance. He was flanked by 2 large, stoic men in dark suits, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd, and a couple of aides who looked nervously at their watches and then at the palace. This was a private visit, a stopgap in a European tour, and the schedule, as always with Trump, was merely a suggestion. He wasn't here for a state visit, no red carpets or formal welcomes. He was here ostensibly as a tourist, though the concept of Donald Trump doing anything as a mere tourist was a contradiction in terms. For him, every place was a stage, every interaction a transaction, and every person an audience member. He surveyed the crowd with a practiced eye, noting the recognition in their stares, the whispers that rippled outwards from his position. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a habit born of a lifetime of seeking approval. To him, and their attention was his due. He was the star of this show, and the palace, the guards, the whole ancient ritual was merely the backdrop for his presence. He gestured to an aide. "Quite a crowd," he said, his voice a distinctive rasp that cut through the ambient noise. "They know! They always know!" The aide, a young man named Kyle, nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. They certainly do. The palace is magnificent today." Trump barely glanced at the building itself. He was more interested in the human element, the pageantry unfolding before them. A detachment of the Queen's Guard, resplendent in their famous scarlet tunics and towering bearskin caps, was marching into the forecourt. They moved with a clockwork precision, their rifles glinting, their faces immobile, a line of living statues in perfect synchronization. The crowd oohed and ahed, cameras clicking furiously. For a moment, even Trump was quiet, watching the display of disciplined power. He understood power, the theater of it, and this, he recognized, was a form of power unlike his own. It was older, sturdier, rooted not in wealth or votes, but in centuries of unbroken tradition. One of the guards, having taken his post, stood ramrod straight in a small sandbagged box near the railings, directly in front of where Trump and his entourage had the best view. He was a young man, but his face, beneath the shadow of the heavy bearskin, was a mask of professional blankness. His eyes were fixed on a point in the middle distance, seeing nothing and everything. He was a symbol, an icon of British sovereignty, and his job was to be exactly that: unmoving, unseeing, unapproachable. Trump moved closer to the railing, and his security detail subtly adjusting their positions to create a buffer. He was intrigued by the guard. The man's absolute stillness, his unblinking stare. It was a challenge. In Trump's world, if you stood still, you were weak. If you didn't engage, you were a loser. You had to dominate, to assert yourself, to make your presence felt. He leaned towards Kyle. "You think he's real? Looks like a wax dummy." Kyle chuckled nervously. "Oh, he's real, sir. They're trained to be completely still. Part of the job." Trump nodded, a familiar glint in his eye. He saw an opportunity, a moment, a piece of theater he could create. He would get a reaction from the statue. He would show this crowd, show these people who the real authority figure was. It was a simple equation to him. He was the most powerful man in the world, in his own estimation. And that man was a soldier. Soldiers salute powerful people. It was a universal language. He ignored the low, "Sir, I don't think that's," from Kyle, which was lost in the murmur of the crowd. He stepped forward, his hand rising in a crisp, decisive motion, his fingers straight, his palm flat, the salute of a commander-in-chief. He held it, aimed directly at the young guardsman, a broad, expectant smile spreading across his face. He was giving the man an order, a silent command to acknowledge his superior. He waited for the reciprocal gesture, the sign of respect he was certain was his right. The guardsman did not move. He did not blink. He did not so much as twitch a muscle in his face. His eyes remained fixed on that eternal, unseen point. The scarlet tunic might as well have been painted on marble. And the silence from the box was absolute, a void that seemed to suck all the air out of the immediate vicinity. For a moment, the smile on Trump's face held, then a flicker of confusion. He held the salute a beat longer, as if the man simply hadn't seen him. He cleared his throat, a loud, abrasive sound. Still nothing. The crowd, sensing a shift in the performance, had gone quiet. The only sounds were the distant traffic and the cooing of pigeons. All eyes were on the former president, his arm held aloft in a gesture that was becoming less a salute and more a question mark. The first part of the story closed on this frozen tableau. The most famous man in the world, demanding acknowledgement from a silent, immovable symbol of an institution that had seen empires rise and fall and that was utterly, completely impervious to his will. And the silence stretched, thick and heavy as fog. Trump's arm, held aloft in what was now an unmistakable salute, began to feel the pull of gravity. The initial triumphant smile had curdled into a tight, bewildered grimace. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. In every boardroom, every rally, every negotiation he'd ever been a part of, a gesture of dominance, of assumed authority, was met with a corresponding sign of submission or, at the very least, engagement. You pushed, someone pushed back, or they folded. That was the dance. But this man, this guard, wasn't playing. He wasn't even on the same dance floor. Trump dropped his hand, but not with the fluid grace of a completed motion. It was more of a chop, a sharp, irritated slash through the air. He turned to Kyle, his face a mask of incredulity. "Yes, what's his problem?" he demanded, his voice loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. "Didn't he see me? I'm giving him a salute. You salute back. It's what you do. It's basic." Kyle shuffled his feet, looking acutely uncomfortable. He was a political appointee, skilled in the art of gentle deflection and schedule management, but he had no protocol for this. He was standing on a London pavement, trying to explain the nuances of the British Crown to a man who had once suggested building a moat filled with alligators on the U.S.-Mexico border. "Well, sir," he began, choosing his words with the care of a bomb disposal expert, "it's a bit different here. They're not really interacting. It's a ceremonial duty. Their role is to be static, to guard." "Guard what? A bunch of tourists?" Trump scoffed, gesturing at the crowd, who were now openly staring, some with amusement, some with disbelief. "I'm a former president of the United States. That carries weight. It carries weight everywhere." He straightened his tie, a nervous, habitual gesture. He should have saluted. It's a sign of respect. An older man in the crowd, a Londoner by the look of his tweed cap and well-worn Barber jacket, chimed in with the unvarnished confidence of a local. "He'd lose his head before he'd salute anyone, mate." Orders are orders. He's not there to acknowledge passing dignitaries. He's there to stand still and look fierce, keeps the tourists in line. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Trump shot him a look that could curdle milk, but the man just smiled benignly back. The lack of deference was a shock to the system. And he was used to rooms full of people hanging on his every word, to standing ovations and chants of his name. Here, he was just another guy in a suit who didn't understand the local customs, and the locals were letting him know it. He tried a different tactic. He turned back to the guard, his body language shifting from demanding to friendly. He gave a small, genial wave, a hey, no hard feelings kind of gesture. He even attempted a smile, though it looked more like a baring of teeth. "It's okay, soldier. At ease. You can relax. The show's over." The guard remained a statue. If anything, his posture seemed to stiffen infinitesimally. The bearskin cap, a full foot of glossy black fur, didn't so much as quiver. The man was a machine, programmed for one function and one function only. And Trump's words were just meaningless vibrations in the air, no more significant than the rumble of a passing lorry. This was the moment the dynamic truly shifted. It was no longer about a missed salute. It was about a fundamental clash of realities. Trump operated in a reality where his persona, his name, his very presence was a force of nature that altered the behavior of everyone around him. He was the sun, and everyone else was expected to orbit. But here, in this small, cobbled corner of London, he had encountered an object of immense gravitational pull that was utterly indifferent to his existence. The guard wasn't just ignoring him, he was, in a very real way, negating him. He was proving that Trump's authority was not a universal constant. It was a conditional, local phenomenon. Flustered, Trump addressed his security detail. "See, get one of them," he ordered, jerking his head towards the cluster of police officers and palace security personnel standing a respectful distance away. "Get someone in charge. I want to talk to whoever is in charge of this guy." His voice had taken on an edge, the familiar prelude to a conflict he intended to win. One of the agents exchanged a glance with his partner, a silent communication honed by years of service. He knew a no-win situation when he saw one. He walked over to a London policeman, a stout, unflappable figure in his fluorescent yellow vest and custodial helmet. There was a brief, murmured conversation. The policeman looked over at Trump, his face a perfect blank, then back at the agent. He shook his head slowly, his expression one of polite but absolute finality. He pointed towards a more senior-looking official near the palace gates, a man in a dark suit and earpiece, and gave a small shrug as if to say, "You can try, but don't expect a miracle." The agent returned to Trump. "Sir, they've pointed out a palace liaison. He's the point of contact for inquiries." He emphasized the last word, hoping to steer the interaction towards a less confrontational path. "Fine. Get him," Trump commanded, crossing his arms over his chest, his jaw set. He was going to get to the bottom of this. He was going to explain to this liaison in clear and simple terms that a visiting world leader, former or not, deserved a certain level of respect, and that this frozen mute was an embarrassment to international relations. The liaison, a man named Alistair Finch, approached with the measured gait of someone who had dealt with entitled people of all stripes for 2 decades. He was lean, immaculately dressed, and his face wore an expression of professional courtesy that was a near impenetrable shield. He greeted Trump with a polite, "Mr. Trump, how can I be of assistance?" Trump launched in without preamble. "Your man over there," he said, pointing an accusatory finger at the oblivious guard. "I gave him a salute from the former Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces, and he ignored me. He didn't move. What kind of discipline is that? It's insulting." Alistair Finch listened.